Did somebody order buildings? Am I in the shot? Yes. Welcome back to JunkDrawer Studio. Today we're gonna make all of these buildings, and actually this is not all of them. There's like a dozen more on my desk over there for my Zombicide Black Plague project. That's right, last week we made these cool tiles. They are magnetic, which is wicked awesome. For the game Zombicide Black Plague, you can use them for just about anything you want. They're cool, gnarly, grassy, dirty cobblestone. And today we're making a boatload of buildings to go on top of these tiles. And if I do say so myself, they came out pretty good. We got some kind of slightly bigger guys. And we got some really bigger guys. They're not that much bigger. I have a whole plan for this Black Plague set of terrain. There's so many more videos coming soon, but first, let's start building these buildings. For the concept here, I went back to my handy dandy notes that I made in the first episode to check out all the different buildings that I would need. I basically went through every tile in the game and made a quick little note on the dimensions and where there were walls and where there were doors and what tile they belonged to. I would need a way to figure out how tall the buildings were, but Mr. Colonel Mustard himself is not gonna cut it. There is a new guy in town for this project. This also made me realize how much taller Colonel Mustard is than a typical mini, so probably shouldn't be using him for scale, but we have to because Colonel Mustard is the best. Okay, moving on. Here is our guide for scale. For this, I wanted the walls to be lower than I would if this was like a diorama, because this needs to be functional. That is one thing in my previous Zombicide project that I honestly think I got wrong. The walls were way too tall. So here I went with 3.5 centimeters. All the other stuff I'm jotting down here I will explain later, but there were just basically lots of measurements to be made, and I highly suggest doing that up front. I took some cheap foam board to make the walls, and again, I went with 3.5 centimeters. This was a good height to add detail to, but not so high that you couldn't get your hands and all the minis in. I measured all of the walls for all of the buildings. Here's a handy trick. Mark with a marker or something the side that the glue is gonna go on, because the 0.5 centimeter width foam board makes a pretty significant difference when you want the overall footprint to be a specific size, so I made sure to mark what side needed the glue once I had all the batch cutting done. I also made sure that these had all of the pre-printed doors in. In that last clip, I'm just making note of it, but I do cut them out before gluing them together. Here I am just testing it out. Yep, it works. Good job, Betsy. I also had some of the buildings be a little bit taller because I thought that would be interesting. So I glued some of them just completely arbitrarily onto a inch piece thick of XPS foam to make kind of like a stony bottom. I looked up a lot of reference of medieval buildings, and this is a feature of a lot of them. I have this cobblestone press that's really good for clay. I mean, it's not really great for anything. It's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest with you. But I didn't think I had to texture up that many of these foam blocks, so I went with that for these, and I was pretty satisfied with the results. Why I didn't do this for the tiles that I made in the previous episode, I don't know. Well, honestly, it would have been really tedious because there was a lot more foam to texture, but I might have considered it if I had remembered I even had that. So here the foam is all textured and it was super quick. I'm really happy with these. Once I made all the stacks, and like I mentioned earlier, I did mark out places where the doors needed to be cut out. You can see them in this shot. I did cut them one by one as I glued them, mostly just to not have a million little pieces so I could keep track easily. And I glued everything in with some tacky glue. If the buildings overshot or were a little wonky, it actually didn't matter that much. I know I talked a lot about measurement in the previous few clips, but because these buildings aren't going to be affixed to the boards themselves, we have a little bit of wiggle room. Next, I shaved some thin pieces of XPS foam, pretty much as thin as I could, took a wire brush and just went over them 1 or 2 times to add a nice convincing wood grain texture. This is a fantastic and easy technique to create some really cheap and easy wood grain. These were gonna be beams on the side. I'm kind of going for like a medieval Tudor style house. I cut those strips in half lengthwise, made a bunch of them, cut them down to size, and just glued them up on the buildings. Now, later on, I will be making doors. I talk about it later in this video, but I needed to make sure there were some faces of these buildings that didn't have any detail. But in the middle of those such faces, I did go ahead and add these wooden beams just to add as much visual interest as I could. The end here I decided to leave fully blank because these 3x1 tiles in particular run the entire length of the 25 centimeter square base tiles. So yes, I can move them around because they're not affixed to the board, but these don't have any other additional wiggle room on the edges. So I had to leave those blank if I wanted them to fit. And here they are with the wooden boards. I'm really happy with how these came out. This did take a long time. This is the first of many montages, actually, that you're going to see in this video, because there are so many buildings. I think there's 37, if I remember off the top of my head. So these steps took a long time, not just this step that you're seeing me do here, but every step after this. The painting took a long time. The weathering took a long time, because I had to do it 37 times. But we got there. Okay, There's so many different moments in this video where I could mention this. This is so hard to line up. I had so many issues when I did my Zombicide 2nd edition board, and even though I had all that experience to back me up, there are still gonna be a little bit of quirks to this set of terrain that come from the fact that it is handmade. So what are some of those quirks? The buildings with the doors facing out will always be positioned on the edge of a tile, but I decided to make these cute little wooden beams on all the sides. So those beams stick out like maybe 1/4 of a centimeter. So they're not gonna sit flush up against the building next to it. There's gonna be a pretty big gap. Do I have a solution for this? Maybe. Is it a great solution? No. There's gonna be a gap. And that's okay. You also might have noticed that some of the buildings have these risers. I did that purely for aesthetics. And then I realized the doors might have to line up with another door. Not only is there a gap, there's a huge drop. Do I have a solution for that? Yes, I do. And I'm gonna get to it also in a future episode. Future Betsy is gonna love past Betsy because there's a lot of things I need to solve for. Wanna hear another one? So another issue I'm gonna have to solve for in the future that you might have noticed if you play Zombicide Black Plague. There are doors pre-printed on the edges of some of the buildings, which I have included in my designs. There are also door tokens that you place on the board, like on this wall or this wall. There's definitely gonna need to be a door in this tile because none of the sides of this center room have a door drawn on it, so that building doesn't have any doors. So how am I gonna include doors? Have a couple ideas. I might do like a clip-on kind of thing. I think that's going to most likely be the solution. Also, these buildings without the stone risers on the bottom have about a 1/2 centimeter of a lip, like where you can see the floor. The buildings with the stone risers do not have that. So just if you're familiar with the game and you were wondering how I was gonna address those things, don't worry, I'm already thinking about it. If you have any ideas for how I can address those things, let me know. But I have some ideas. I think it'll all work out. I'm mostly just calling it out so you don't have to. But also you can call anything out because it helps the algorithm. Back to the video. Friendly reminder to label the bottom of the buildings if you are finding yourself doing this very specific task of making buildings for a board game that correspond to tiles. because I almost painted over the labels, and while that wouldn't have been catastrophic, it is very useful knowing which building goes with which tile. After labeling the bottoms of all of them, I went in and painted a pass of Mod Podge and black paint, but then I realized I wanted to distress some of the tiles. So I went in with a blade and added a little bit of gnarly, distressing detail, like the building is crumbling apart, just to some of the tiles. I genuinely don't think I went overboard this time. I have definitely gone overboard with this type of thing in the past, but I just did it to probably like 25 to 30% of the tiles. And I think it added a nice bit of character so that when you have a whole scenario set up, you really can see the variation in the buildings and also the sort of post-apocalyptic rundown vibe that we're going for here. I made sure some of the tiles that I was distressing were the ones with the stone, sort of what I've been calling risers or bottoms, because that, again, just adds visual interest. And finally, like I promised, another time lapse of me priming with the Mod Podge and black paint every single building. This time lapse honestly doesn't even do it justice because I didn't film the whole thing, but it took a long time. I didn't prime the floors because those are going to have the magnetic paint, and I don't know, I guess I still maybe should have sealed the foam now that I think about it, but I didn't bother doing that because using the magnetic paint felt like a really fundamental like base coat step. I don't know what I'm talking about right now. I just didn't do the floors. Maybe I should have. Maybe it didn't matter. And finally, they were all primed. I didn't worry about them having a super solid coat. I thought this was good enough, and it was. Finally, on to adding some color. I started with the stone on all the buildings that had stone and did a pretty typical approach that you've seen me do before. You've probably seen others do before, where I just did a heavy overbrush of a medium light-ish gray. I do pretty much cover everything, but I don't worry about getting the paint into all the little corners because that little black that peeks out in the crevices helps just add more depth. I then did a couple dry brush passes of progressively lighter grays just to pick out all of the detail. The texture sort of stamp that I had used on these didn't make a super deep texture, but I do think dry brushing helped pull out all the texture that was there and really maximized, you know, the approach here. This was a very quick way to texture this stone, and the dry brushing with all the different lighter grays, and here I think I get up to almost pure white. It's such an easy and effective formula. Love the way that this came out, and it was, again, so fast, so easy. Then I moved on to the main walls, outer walls that is, of the buildings with some light beige paint, and I also added some sand. Mostly went with that brown play craft sand that you saw on the left, and then I added a little bit of the fine, like model railroad ballast, which it's called fine ballast, but it is actually more coarse than the play sand. This, I just wanted to look, again, like those old medieval buildings that are, I guess, made with sort of like plaster, maybe actual rocks. I didn't do any actual research into this other than visual research, so I have no idea what these walls are made out of, but you know what I'm talking about, like those medieval taverns. They don't have shingles, they have this kind of stony, rough, plastery looking walls, and that's what I was going for. One coat was almost enough, but two made sure that the stony texture was all the way up into the corners. The next step is dry brushing, or this is a pretty heavy dry brush actually, and kind of stippling also of this off-white. This was just to brighten up the middle and almost kind of have the opposite effect of like a wash. Instead of doing a wash that darkened the corners, I just did this dry brush in the middle of all the wall panels so that the corners would have that darker beige and just add a little bit of extra dimension and grime. I've used this technique a couple times in personal projects, and it always looks really effective and is really fun to do, honestly, because it's one of the faster parts of this process. Next, I painted the walls. I got out a bunch of different beige, orangey, yellowy, brownish, neutral colors to paint all the walls. I wanted the walls colors to be varied, but I was thinking like medieval, old, decrepit buildings would probably mostly be neutral tones. So that's why I stuck with these. Again, I didn't do any research, you guys. I just kind of picked some colors that I thought would look appropriate. Those took a lot of coats to get the walls done, and then I took a dark brown and a gloss varnish, mixed those together, and painted all of the wood. This was the process that took the longest, and it was because of this that you're looking at right here, painting all of the lips. Again, there are 37 buildings, so I had to paint the trim on all of them. This took days. Like, I don't have an exact hour count, but start and stopping throughout several different sessions. This was not fun, and I was really happy when it was done. I also had to do 2 coats, so it took a really long time, but look at how these look when they're done. I mean, they look so good. Finally, I'm done with the wooden parts of all the buildings. That took an exceptionally long amount of time. I guess I shouldn't be that surprised. Still a lot left to do on these, but I feel like I've passed a huge hurdle getting all of that initial painting done. I probably should touch up the inside walls a bit. I've done 2 coats and they're a little streaky. You could totally leave well enough alone here, but I plan to add a little bit of washes in some places, probably a little bit of like moss, and maybe dirt or some kind of grime, because this is supposed to be like medieval, but like rundown post-apocalyptic medieval fantasy. I also have to tackle the floors. That's like the big elephant in the room. I haven't even touched the floors yet. Since doing that first video, I did also buy some big washers. You'll see what those look like in the video, but I might try to extend my iron powder a little bit and not use it in every single floor. I'm going to maybe use some of the washers as well to add some metal to the floor so that those are magnetic. You'll see what I mean when I get to that. And then I just need to put some sort of material on the tops of these and probably the door jambs as well. At this point, you're probably asking me, where are the roofs? I don't know if I'm going to make roofs. I still could. If you feel like this project would be a wash if I didn't have roofs, let me know. I am willing to listen. In my Zombicide 2nd Edition project, not only did I make roofs for every single building, I also made second floors on some of them that were completely just for flavor and were not like part of the game at all, really. But that made it a lot harder to store. But maybe there's a way I can figure out the minimum amount of roofs I would need. I'll leave that for me to figure out, but let me know in the comments below if you want to see roofs. Even just talking about it, like, I do want to do it. Immediately when you start playing the game, the roofs come off. So they are strictly thematic and have nothing to do with the mechanics of the game and are like so extra. But it would look really good. We'll figure that out later. Let's finish up these buildings. Now we are finally on to one of my favorite parts, which is adding washes. I was going to use Athonian Camo Shade, but I probably would have had to use that entire bottle and then some. So I thought, Betsy, don't be lazy, make a wash. And that I did. I made a wash with some green and some sepia acrylic ink mixed with a bunch of water. And I mostly put it in the corners of the wall panels, as well as you'll see in a moment, the stone parts, and anywhere where there was damage where I feel like grime might be dripping down. Remember those washers I mentioned? Well, this is the part where I used them, but spoiler alert, I only ended up using a handful because the process was just so tedious. That seems to be the vibe of this video, is that everything is tedious, but it is worth it in the end. What I did was I glued the washers, as many as I could fit in a building, glued them in with tacky glue, put more tacky glue on top, and then painstakingly cut some bits of wooden coffee stirrers to make wooden floors. Now look, lots of people make wooden floors for different dungeon tiles and dioramas. I probably could have done this a little bit more efficiently, but I was full steam ahead and just could not do that many times. So I did it for a few tiles, and for the rest, I did this, which is magnetic paint. We're finally on to the magnetic paint. I used the ratio that I had developed in the first episode, which is about 1 part glue, 1 part paint, and 2.5, or was it 1.5? I think 2.5 parts iron powder. No, I was right before. It was 1.5 part iron powder. Okay, back to the video. It worked really well. I did 2 coats. This is just the first coat, but I was very carefully applying it because I had already painted the walls. It looks a little weird here with just 1 coat that hasn't even dried yet. But once I did 2 coats, this was awesome. It looked like a dirty, dirt floor. I feel like in these medieval kind of buildings, I guess some people would have more sophisticated floor, like tiles or, wood, like I did in some of the buildings. But I imagine a lot of these smaller homes in this sort of medieval fantasy land would just maybe have dirt floors or cementy kind of floors that are dirty. I don't know. Again, maybe I'm wrong because I didn't do any historical research, but this looked right to me. Here it is wet, but when they dry, they look really awesome. Real quick interruption for the question of the video segment. What board games do you want to see me do this approach to next? There's a bunch of other Zombicide games I could do. I really want to do Undead or Alive, maybe Invaders. I don't think that Zombicide is as popular as the other ones, but I would love to do a space aesthetic. I think that would be really fun. Even if it's a game that just needs some custom little treasure bits or any sort of custom component for a board game that you think could use the JunkDrawer Studio treatment, let me know in the comments below. Ah, yes, my favorite part, the final details. First, I cut some strips of XPS foam to be 1/2 centimeter and glued them all across the tops of the tiles. I could have just painted these. I could have used a variety of materials. You can't go wrong as long as you clean up this edge. I went with XPS foam because if I ever stack these tiles, I just don't like the exposed paint touching other exposed paint because they tend to stick together. So I thought this was a nice protective cover. What I'm just gesturing to in this clip is the unpainted edge of the door jamb. That is what we tackle shortly once we get all the XPS foam glued in. And here's another very fancy camera angle because I felt like this project was so tedious that I needed to vary up the camera angles. Perfect. I also added that same green wash to all the wood that I had made. This wood floor here has a little bit of the magnetic paint to kind of emulate dirty floors over the wood. And here I am finally painting those door jambs with a nice clean black. Last, I filled these little lips that were caused by the walls being glued on the outside of the floor pieces into all the door jambs. This is just a piece of balsa wood cut to size and stained with that same green stain. I like these little details. It does make the doors more flush with the floor. I think it looks really nice and just adds a nice little pop of color. And I mentioned it earlier in the video, but the ones with the stone bottoms don't have that same issue, so no little piece of balsa wood was necessary because the walls are flush with the bottom of the floor. In regards to how it's all gonna fit together, I don't know. We'll figure that out in a future episode. We're almost done. These tiles are looking awesome. I love the weathering. I love the way that this dirt floor looks, but I felt like we needed just a little extra something. So in comes my favorite part of the process, adding moss and little grassy bits. So I took a bunch of different turfs, these 2 different colors of fine turf and that coarse turf from the previous shot, mixed it all together with some PVA glue. I've done this in previous episodes, but I haven't done it in a while. This is a fantastic technique. You just smear it on wherever you want, and it dries hard and solid and looks like just a cool, mossy ivy kind of creeping up the side of something. I think this clip that I filmed looks fine, but some of the end results look absolutely fantastic. I did end up using a finger to kind of smear it on. The popsicle stick was a little unwieldy, but that is what I chose to actually film for the edit, so that is what you are seeing. But you'll see the final buildings at the end. This outfit is giving Professor Betsy. Professor Betsy here. If you saw the first episode in this series where I made the tiles, you probably recall all of those tests I did with the neodymium magnets from the Magnet Baron. They worked great. These are high quality magnets, but we still have a lot of stuff to make in this series, including tons of scatter train. I also want to put some of these magnets on the bases of the minis. Using these for the buildings maybe isn't super necessary. For a whopping $6, I bought this roll of self-adhesive magnets. It is a lot weaker than the neodymium magnets, like a lot weaker. But some of these buildings are kind of heavy, so I don't think I need to use my fancy neodymium magnets. I think I can just use these. It's not the strongest connection. You can't really tell, but I can feel it. But this way, it's a little bit cheaper. It makes the buildings magnetic enough, and I get to save these nice magnets for all the cool scatter that we're gonna make in a future episode. I'm not gonna bother gluing these on camera. You can imagine what that would look like. That is gonna do it for this episode. I will have a little end reveal so you can see what all of the buildings look like on the tiles, so stay tuned for that. If you are a big Zombicide Black Plague fan, you might have realized that I left out a couple of very important buildings. I have them on my handy list. Please ignore this. It's just the green wash that I made. It's nothing gross. But there is this unique building here, this one here, this one, this L-shaped one, this really funky looking one, and this other L-shaped one. 6 buildings that I haven't made yet. But Betsy, this is the building episode. Yeah, but your girl be busy. In order to get all of these buildings done, I needed to hold off on the super unique shape. But you will see the bigger, fancier, cooler buildings soon. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to these lovely people on the sides of the screen here who have given me a super thanks, very generous. You never have to give me your hard-earned money, but if you wanted to, that is currently the only way to do it. I don't have a Patreon or anything like that. Hopefully someday soon I will, but you're welcome here either way. If you liked this video, consider liking it, hyping it, consider subscribing if you want to see what I do next. We are in the middle of this Black Plague series, and we've got probably at least 4 or 5 episodes left. Stay safe out there. Take care of your neighbors. Take care of yourself. Be kind. Practice empathy. I've ended a lot of my videos this way recently, but I feel like we need it. We need to be kind. We need to be empathetic. We need to fight for what we believe in, and we need to take care of ourselves and our neighbors. And see you in the next one. Here's the final reveal. Bye.